Now, excuse me, I have a, it sounded like I was joking there for a second, didn't it? I think I'm okay. Anyway, sorry about that. What I've got here is a map of the way the U.S. got all the Lend-Lease supplies to the Soviet Union. And I think really, so a lot of these supplies, a significant amount came to the Asiatic or Siberia from the West Coast. That makes a lot of sense. It's a relatively easy journey from the West Coast to Siberia, except in winter, of course. Other supplies came through the north west part of the Soviet Union. I think what's really interesting is a significant amount of these supplies came through Iran. And there was a major base, a major U.S. base in Iran. And of course, Iran borders the USSR. In fact, the USSR made an attempt to grab Iran after the war. It didn't go anywhere. But a significant amount of these goods went through Iran into the Soviet Union. So there was a whole logistical infrastructure that is almost completely forgotten today, where U.S. goods are being shipped to the Soviet Union. And of course, we've forgotten it in the U.S., although it's something I think we can be very proud of, as I've said before. But if the Soviets have forgotten about it too. They really downplay the importance of Lend-Lease, and especially Putin, because Putin's all about the great patriotic war, and this is how he's whipping up the fever of the Russians during the invasion of Ukraine, that the Ukrainians are Nazis that have to be defeated again, even though the Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is Jewish. It's hard to be a Jewish Nazi. So Putin is using the memory of World War II, the Great Patriotic War, to whip up Russian nationalist fever. And of course, he's not going to talk about U.S. Lend-Lease. That's the last thing he's going to talk about. But nonetheless, facts are very stubborn things. And as I talked about, and there's some other figures that I wanted to talk about. The U.S. supplied 2,000 locomotives to the Soviet Union, 2,000, and tens of thousands of boxcars as well. So basically, the military infrastructure of the Soviet Union during World War II, the transportation infrastructure, was supplied by the United States, and to a large extent, the communications infrastructure as well. Tens of thousands of radios were sent to the Soviet Union, hundreds of thousands of miles of wire. So the U.S. did play a major role in the Soviet victory over the Nazis, although you really have to acknowledge, or one has to acknowledge, it was the courage of the Soviet people and the Soviet army that ultimately won the day. But in terms of technology, what did Stalin say? The U.S. is a country of machines, and the U.S. really came through. And I think the U.S. is coming through today in Ukraine, but that's another course, I guess. What else did the Soviets get from us? Well, they've got about 60% of their fuel came from the U.S. The U.S. probably produced 80% of the world's oil in the 1940s, and the Soviet Union did too, but its fields were under intense pressure from the German army. So what would happen is that U.S. Aviation fuel, which was very high grade, would be mixed with the lower grade Soviet fuel. So a lot of a significant amount of the aviation fuel of the Soviet Air Force came from the U.S., just under 60%. We provided over half of the aluminum that the Soviet Union used during the war, and more than 80% of the copper. 1/3 of all the explosives that the Soviet, did I say U.S. before? 1/3 of all the explosives that the Soviet Union used during the Civil War, and also thousands and thousands of pounds of steel, 35,000 radio sets, 32,000 motorcycles, 32,000 motorcycles. When the war ended, almost a third of all the Red Army vehicles had been provided through Lend-Lease, which is incredible. It's very, very significant. Um, as I said before, the railroad system was very significant, and these were all significant in the road system, the transport, in providing mobility to the Soviet Army. It just would not have been possible for the Red Army to move the masses of troops and supplies on the primitive roads of Russia without things such as American Studebaker trucks, which again, and also they, as I said before, these trucks often served as the launching pad for rocket artillery that the Soviet Army used very, very effectively. So the other thing that is interesting, and it's interesting to me because my dad, my stepfather, was a salesman for Hormel when I was a kid, and the big product for Hormel is Spam. And to this day, I still love Spam. I love Spam with fried eggs. And Spam was a product that was invented in the 1920s. It was designed to allow household budgets to be extended. And one of the things that we sent both to England and to the Soviet Union in huge numbers was Spam. So Margaret Thatcher, who used to be the Prime Minister of Great Britain, in her memoirs, she writes about what a luxury Spam was in Great Britain because Great Britain was suffering from food shortages. And so Spam turned out to be an incredibly important gift to the of the United States to the Soviet Union. To go back to Khrushchev, Nikita Khrushchev, he wrote in his memoirs, without Spam, we wouldn't have been able to feed our army. So even down to the level of basic rations, the US played a key role in assisting the Soviet Union. And yeah, every once in a while, I'll get out Spam. I'll still eat it. Reminds me of being a kid. And the last thing I'll say about Spam is that now Spam's the word for junk mail. It's really become stigmatized. Well, Spam, I'm happy to say, and I say this in honor of my stepfather, Spam had a glorious history during World War II and made a real difference in the defeat of the Nazis and helping the defeat of the Nazis. So it's hard to imagine that the Soviet Union would have won without Lend-Lease supplies. Let me read you just one more quote. Now, this is Marshal Zhukov, who was the head of the Soviet Army. And he said, after the war, he said, the Americans shipped over to us material without which we could not have equipped our armies, held in reserve, or been able to continue the war. Zhukov explained, we did not have enough munitions, and how would we have been able to turn out all those tanks without the rolled steel sent to us by the Americans, let alone the 400,000 trucks that were dispatched? So Lend-Lease, from the miracle of U.S. industrial production, a key, if often forgotten factor in the victory over the evil that was Nazi Germany.